Hi, welcome to the Marvelous Mud Pottery Studio podcast. I'm Diana Harrison and I'm here with Rachelle Eason.
Hi, welcome. We're excited to have you back this week.
This is episode 3, I think. Episode
3, yes, 3.
Yes.
Woohoo!
And today we are going to talk about Sgraffito and carving.
Yes, we are.
Well, as we mentioned last time, we've been working on boxes and lids and things like that. But also we've been working on carving and Sgraffito.
Yes. And we don't really have any boxes that are finished from the lessons that we did a couple weeks ago because, as we know, it takes a while for clay to dry, at least a week before it gets fired the first time, and then it gets glazed and fired the second time. So it could be a good 3 to 4 weeks before you get a finished piece, just depending on the weather and also how everything's drying and that kind of thing. So we just pulled some examples of Sgraffito and carving because it's definitely easier to talk about both of those things with the visuals. Sgraffito is the act of carving through a layer to reveal the layer that's beneath it. And so in clay, we're talking about 2 different ways of doing Sgraffito. We can do it in the greenware state, which greenware is your raw clay, your clay before it's fired at all, was wet clay and it's drying and then it's going to get fired. And in the greenware state, we glaze with an underglaze or a slip, a colored slip, and we put it on the clay and then we basically carve through that coating of underglaze or slip to reveal the clay that's underneath it. Now, the other way that you can do Sgraffito is actually in bisqueware, which I have not shared with any of my students that you can do this, but you can actually build up layers of glaze in on your bisque, which again, bisque is clay that has been fired one time, and then you glaze it and it gets fired the second time. But if you have stable glazes, and this only works with stable glazes that aren't going to run in your firing, you can actually layer those glazes up and carefully carve through the top layer of glaze to reveal the bottom layer of glaze, or even to reveal the bisque under that. That's a little bit more challenging when we're doing a mid-fire or stoneware that we fire at Marvelous Mud because many of our glazes move and run when they're fired. So we don't get that stable finish if we do it that way. So we go back to that first one I was talking about, and this is Diana's. Diana, would you like to share with us what you did on that piece?
Well, first I made the dome. We pinched it, or I pinched it, and basically turned it upside down and then created the tray for it. So then I did some Sgraffito there and then made sure it sat on top so my glaze wasn't touching. And then I used a rose for the handle, yeah. And then did some leaves cascading down. So I did some Sgraffito on the leaves and then Sgraffito the flowers on the base.
Yep, so you can see how the designs were carved through her underglaze colors. And that clay, even though that clay looks like a beige color right now, when it fires to the finished clay, to the finished level, it's going to look, it's actually not that much difference, but it's actually going to look a little bit like this. This is called desert buff clay, and so you will get this kind of beige look. So this is a Sgraffito piece that is on the same kind of clay that Diana used. And basically what I did is when it was in the raw state like hers is now, I used my underglaze and then I went back through with a Sgraffito tool or a loop tool or a carving tool of some kind, and I just pulled off the color so that it would reveal the clay that's underneath it, and that's how I got these designs. And so all of these pieces are examples of Sgraffito using underglazes, and this one's been fired all the way. So this is this was my demo for teaching them that piece that Diana's showing you, and you can see on the inside there's some Sgraffito all around. And then I have an issue with keeping things in sections. I like flinging glaze, and so after I did all my Sgraffito and it was all nice and neat and straight lines and all that, that drove me crazy. So I just had to throw some glaze on it, and so that's where I get the little splotches and all that on top of it. But this was the little sample. The purpose of these is actually in the image of a French butter bell, which you can put butter inside there and serve that at your table. And so that's what that style is right there.
I love your coil handle on there too.
Yeah, so that was fun. And I kind of tried to do something just like you have the rose. I like to do something that's a little bit funky and out of the ordinary and all of that. These pieces are also Sgraffitoed. So again, when they were done in clay, this is a whiter clay, this is little loafers. When the piece was made in clay, then I just glazed the colors, and sometimes I glazed it like this in certain designs and then would carve through those designs to highlight those designs. That's one part of Sgraffito. But sometimes, as in this one, I just glazed the whole thing in a variety of colors because I don't do just one glaze color. And then I went in and I just randomly Sgraffitoed or carved designs just based on a whim. I didn't have anything planned. I just went in and did a lot of my normal little doodles basically and had them pop out. The thing that we want to make sure of when we're doing Sgraffito is that because your piece shrinks multiple times, it shrinks when it is in the greenware stage. As that water, that moisture level comes out of the clay, it starts to shrink. It shrinks in the first firing when it's going to bisque, but it shrinks the most in the glaze firing. That's when it's really going to shrink down because that clay is tightening up, it's vitrifying, it's becoming sealed so it will hold water. When you're making these Sgraffito lines, you need to make sure that those lines are wide enough and deep enough to allow for the shrinkage. Because if they're just very fine lines, as that piece shrinks and tightens up, those lines would disappear. You wouldn't even see them on there. So that's one of the things you want to make sure of.
So how do you approach it? Like when you're doing this, do you just pick not just pick, but do you pick a starting point?
No. I just pick it up and start carving. That's just me. Now, I have multiple students that don't do it that way, and that would throw them into a tizzy. And so they might come in like this sample right here and very precisely section it out and have a very nice uniform design all the way around. It's gorgeous. It's lovely. I can appreciate that very much. I can appreciate that more because you did it and I didn't, because it is not my style to do. For me to sit there and plan out and, be very regimented with how I'm doing stuff would drive me absolutely bonkers. I'm just not that kind of a person. The closest I got was to this. I knew when I was making this that this is what I knew. Let's rephrase that. This is what I knew when I was making this. I wanted big, funky daisies all over the whole top. As you can see, they're not big, funky daisies. So they're little daisies that ended up being black and not even the colors that I was thinking of. When I plan something, it very rarely comes to fruition. I let the clay speak to me, and when I was in the midst of doing this, I was like, that's not what this wants to be. This wants to have these little dome, carved things, and these funky little flowers, that kind of thing. So I try to not approach any build with a plan. And I even try to not approach any Sgraffito with the plan. So on something like this, I might have said, you know, it would be fun to have kind of a puzzle type line, squiggly line that's going around to make it look like there's puzzle pieces, but I didn't plan what that looked like. The closest thing that I would have gotten to maybe planning might be something like this. I knew I wanted this to be a mushroom mug. Now, the difference between this and these, and I have some other samples of this, is that these are dark clay with a white slip on them. And this dude is one of my favorites that was done like this. Sorry that we're looking at each other through the little foo-foos, but so the difference is that I created these with a dark clay. It's kind of a brownish chocolate brown clay. And when it was somewhat dry, I put a white slip on it instead of an underglaze. It's called a white slip. Slip is a liquid form of clay. So I did that, and then I was able to go in and carve through the white slip to let the clay reveal itself, the clay color reveal itself. And so that is Sgraffito as well. And that's actually something that I do for the collections that I make, the collections that I sell, the collections that I keep. I spend more time with this type of Sgraffito than I do with that type of Sgraffito. Even though I love color, I think the detail shows better when it is this stark dark color with the white. So that's what I do. And so coming back to this little guy, my little mushroom mug, I just thought it was fun to doodle some of these mushrooms on there. I did have sketches. These were actually sketches of mushroom fairy houses and things like that that I had from my art journaling sketchbook. And I just pulled that out. And no, I didn't plan how many that I would put on there. I just kind of started drawing, and that's how many came to be. And then once I had all my little houses on there, I then put these little doodles in there to kind of just take up some space. And this is very much my style. Again, with these, this is one of my favorite pieces. She's little, but she's a little crystal holder, and she sits in my bedroom. And again, Sgraffitoed. You can see on the back there's designs, and on the front it was kind of a little bit more like this, like the fur of an owl or something, the surface of an owl. But yeah, I have little flower designs on the back of her. And then again, this one was just very simple. So I really like I like when I do something with detail like that, I want that to show. Like I'm gonna do whatever is going to make it show the most, and that's kind of why I like to do the white slip on the dark clay. That seems to kind of fit my fancy.
Yeah, it's some of my favorite pieces of yours. On this one, you've got, what I like about this is you've got both the positive and the negative. You used the slip to your advantage on both different
I did, yes.
sketches. And then on this one, you added a little bit of glaze, just little touches on his eyes, and I think on the flower over
Yep,
here.
there's a little flower on there, and these are separate little things. But yes, there's actually a little peace sign down here, if you can see that was glazed too.
Oh.
So just kind of little elements to pop out. I have this thing, there's a lot of dust on here. I have this thing about eyes, that one eye is a flower. On most things, I think I didn't do it on that giraffe, but on a lot of animals and things like that I do one eye is a flower and the other eye is not, and this just kind of helps pop that out. But yeah, I think that those elements all contribute to the expression of the piece that I'm trying to make, and they're all just very expressive of me too, and so I really like that. One of the things though we were talking about was the difference between Sgraffito and carving, and so Sgraffito is carving, but Sgraffito is carving again through a layer to reveal a layer beneath, whereas and this is actually a Sgraffitoed piece. I'm going to get into carving in a minute, but this one's a little bit more simple because this clay was colored clay, and then I just did one color on top, and I was able to Sgraffito through that. And again, done in kind of the same manner that these were, that it's just a contrast between one color in the base. I personally was thinking that this colored clay was lighter and these would show up a little bit more, but I kind of like that. I think that's kind of a fun little cup. But when we get into carving is a little different than Sgraffito. So carving is when you're using, again, greenware clay, so clay before it's fired, and you're actually just putting designs in the clay itself. You haven't put underglaze on it, you haven't put slip on it, you have just started to carve, and then it's going to get fired to bisque. And once it's fired to bisque, then you can decide how to glaze it. And often when I do carving, I don't glaze in like a coloring book image. And what I mean by that is all my little sections I wouldn't color out like you would in a coloring book. I leave some of those sections to have the same color glaze on them and let the carving show the differences. So for example, right here that we're looking at, can see that there's some fluting going on, these little kind of catches of the clay right here, and then there's some lines up here, there's some dots over here. So there's different sections within my carving that I could have glazed differently, but I chose to keep one glaze over that whole thing and just let the designs speak for themselves, because then when I do have something that's a little bit more pronounced, like this little house, the tree, even this little flower over there, that's going to stand out more because it does have additional color to it. So just because you're adding designs doesn't mean all those designs have to be highlighted. If you highlight every single part, then it's not a highlight anymore. The whole thing is designed kind of on the same level. So even though I don't plan my designs, a lot of times I will go in and decide what I want to pop and what is just going to stay as background. And so that I kind of know even before we get to this stage. So that's kind of the extent of my planning. This is one that was carved, and we used red iron oxide, or I used red iron oxide on it, and it made these leaves have those carvings and kind of stick out a little bit. And we'll talk about red iron oxide another time because that's a whole nother topic. But then I went in and I just popped some color into the little carvings that were here. And that's just a sweet little creamer or little water pitcher or something like that. What do you like about Sgraffito or carving, Diana?
Well, I was laughing when you were talking about how like detailed that is, because it was way easier in my head than when
yeah
like it sounded like a great idea, and 3/4 of the way through I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But I'm excited to see how it turns out. This is so far the most I have liked it. I've only done a couple projects with it, but this felt like my carving was coming along a little bit better. I was more patient with it this time.
Yeah.
And it just went slower.
Yeah.
And I think that helped the execution. We'll see what the kiln decides, but it looks smoother than when I put it in the kiln previously.
It is very smooth, and it does, Sgraffito, the success of Sgraffito depends on multiple variables like we've talked about before, but one is catching it at the right moisture level. If it's too dry, your Sgraffito is going to chip, your glaze is going to chip off, and if it's too wet, you're going to have all these little wet crumbs that are going to have a hard time, you're going to have a hard time taking them off. And so, that's one of the things. It's also the type of tool you use. That is one thing that I like, the diamond cord tools that I absolutely love. Those are the best Sgraffito tools that I have found, because those tools actually have a blade on them and not just a loop. So there's a variety of things that as you progress through and you improve your technique, that you start to find what works for you, and and all of that. The one thing, just to kind of wrap up, is that when you are using the underglaze and you're going to Sgraffito, you want to make sure that you are covering just the section you're going to be able to carve in that sitting. So we talk to our members a lot about they have done their 3 layers of underglaze, and then they come back to do their Sgraffito, and their underglaze is chipping off. It's dry. It's making, it's not doing right. Well, and then they try to add more glaze and fix that and all that kind of stuff, and then they can't match the thickness of the glaze that they had on. I mean, there's just all kinds of problems. So the best tip that I can give people as far as Sgraffito is sectioning out the pieces, sectioning out your piece, and only tackle what you can conquer in one sitting. So for example, in Diana's piece, she has this really nice 3-part, three sections of her dome with her flower, and then she has the leaves. So in one sitting, I would have, if I was here with her, and I'm sure she already knew this, so I'm telling her what she already knows. But I would say, okay, do those 3 parts where that pink is, and do the rose first. Don't put underglaze anywhere else. Concentrate on that area. Get your layers in there. Make sure you have enough time to do the Sgraffito. You can come back and clean up later, but you can't come back and recarve, or if you have if you made a mistake and you want to kind of erase it and reglaze and do all that, that's a no-no, because you can't really tell how thick your layers were. So you want to kind of do it all in one sitting and get that section done. And then the next time, come back and do the leaves. Those were a different color. Those are carving. You're still going to wrap it up in between. But if she had come in and done all the pink underglaze, all the green underglaze, and didn't start her carving and didn't have enough time to do all that carving, she would have been in trouble with it. She would not have been able to finish it as nicely as you've done it. So you have to just kind of bite off what you can chew in a sitting, and that's it.
Yeah, and I would say if you're just getting started, if you're experimenting, start with some simple lines and simple shapes. That way you get the feel for how your tools are working.
Exactly, that's a big deal. You have to understand how your tools work and how they're going to, how your piece is going to result. And I think that, again, we go back to test tiles. I'm always preaching test tiles. If that's important to have a piece that you're really, really happy with, you need to do test tiles first. That doesn't mean to say that a piece that you don't do tiles with you wouldn't be happy with, but if you're kind of fly on the seat of your pants and you're just kind of learning as you go, it's okay to experiment and explore. And that's the best way to learn, I think. But if you really are invested in the piece, you've spent a lot of time sculpting, and you really want to make sure it's top notch, then you need to go ahead and make some test tiles first and play around with different things and get used to your tools before you do anything else.
Yeah, and I would say with the Sgraffito, I found like it doesn't really, you can't really hide your flaws. Like sometimes the glaze will, normal. I know it's all glazing, but the normal when you apply with a paintbrush the glaze, you can hide some of but the Sgraffito shows everything. I feel like
it really does. It really does. Sgraffito does show everything. So what happens? Let's talk about just the rest of the journey this piece will go on. So this is raw clay, and she did her underglaze, and she did her carving, her Sgraffito, and she did the little marks in her leaves. So all of that is ready now to go into the first firing, and that will take it to bisque. And so after it's bisque fired, you will most likely do what? How are you going to finish that up?
I'm gonna put a clear glaze over it.
Okay, so then it's gonna pop like this. So this has a clear glaze, there's a shine on it, and then she'll put that back in to get fired. It will fire to our glaze temperature, which is a cone 6. It's a high cone 6, so it's around 2200 degrees. And then it will all be vitrified, food safe, and she'll be able to use that for whatever she would like. So it's going to be a beautiful piece.
Thank you. One quick question before we go.
Yes.
How are we gonna fire this? Is this gonna sit like this in the kiln?
Yeah, so the key on any of these pieces, whether it's a box or something else with a lid, you want those two pieces to fire together, which means the areas that are glazed can't touch. So as long as you have left, a little margin, I always say like a fingertip at the bottom, around the area, like the bottom of the dome, where it's touching the bottom part, and where it is touching the bottom part, you haven't glazed on that either on the bottom. As long as you've done that, I'm going to pick this up, and there's no glaze. You want to show that part, how that's not glazed down there? Yep. So this will be able to fire together, and that means it's going to shrink together, and that's the key. That even though she used the same clay for both top and bottom, and the shrinkage rate is basically the same, the builds are different. One is a pinch pot upside down bowl, basically. It has some thickness to it. The bottom is a slab that's a little thinner. So your shrinkage rates are actually different between the two, even though it's the same clay and it's going in the same kiln load. So you want your pieces to be put together for that firing so that it has a way of shrinking together, and that way it's a better fit once it's finished. And that's the key to boxes or domes or anything that we have. We don't want there to be any kind of wiggle. Now mine's going to wiggle a little bit because I don't have it. We have like this little mark in here. Well, actually my mark's right there, and then another mark back there that shows where it matches. So there's not a wiggle. And so when you put your lids on there, you don't want to wiggle because they get very slippery when they're fired ceramic, and we don't want them to just slide off when we're carrying them to a table or something like that. So the fit is very, very important. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about these?
I don't think so. This was great though. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you guys for tuning in again. This is Marvelous Mud Pottery Studio coming at you with some tips and tricks about Sgraffito and carving today. And you can find us at marvelousmudpotterystudio.com. And we are located in Lakeland, Florida. So if you get down to this area, especially during our sunshiny winters, we would love to see you.